Hello and welcome to season 2 of Sunday Sweet Chats. My name is Donny Winter and I am a poet residing in Michigan. And I am really excited to guest host for this particular episode because it's a fun experience in my opinion. So we are going to be talking with our sweet guest today, who happens to be Charles K. Carter. So let's discuss some sweet, sweet poetry. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Charles K. Carter. I am a queer poet from Iowa who recently relocated to Oregon. I am the author of several chapbooks, and including most recently, Artificial Sweetness. And my first full-length collection came out last fall called Read My Lips, which is right over my shoulder here, which I'm really proud of
Stunning
that one.
collection. It's a stunning collection, everyone.
Thank you, thank you. Um, and I'm going to talk a little bit later. My second full length is coming soon, which we'll talk about. Um, I have two spoiled dogs and a special needs cat who is also spoiled, even though she doesn't think she is, because she just wants to be outdoors, even though it's not really safe for her. I enjoy live music. Melissa Etheridge is my like ultimate obsession, but I love such a variety of music. Um, Live music, I don't know. I think is like church for me. I think
I know we both love Evanescence, so
yes.
that makes me super happy.
Yes, definitely like Evanescence, The Used, My Chemical Romance, Him. Those were like my
Uh,
bands in high school, like my emo heart. Um, which I still love those. And like I wasn't really allowed to or able to see a lot of them in concert because I lived in the middle of nowhere and they were like 4 hours away in a big city, and that was so scary and wasn't allowed as a teenager. So
that's a whole mood.
I'm reliving a lot of those. Like I'm seeing these bands now as an adult, and it's so like I don't know, it just brings me back, and it's wonderful and beautiful. And so music, yeah, is big for me. I like yoga. I like getting out in nature, walking on the beach or walking in the forest. Like I love that stillness, that calmness. Yeah. So a
And you
little
know
bit,
what I
bit about
love
me.
is that love of nature definitely is very much present in all of your poetry. But before we delve into poetry, so since this show is Sunday Sweet Chats, well, we have to know, what is your favorite sweet treat?
So I kind of did an episode of myself like last season, and I said a chocolate bar that I like. But really, much like you in your episode, ice cream really is like my go-to dessert. I love
Oh,
ice cream and all different types of ice cream. I don't do dairy, but there's so many delicious non-dairy, and like people who eat
absolutely.
dairy have tried some of them and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Um, there's a non-dairy brand called So Delicious, and their salted caramel is amazing. It's
Oh,
like caramel and little chocolate chunks, and there's like cashew chunks too. It's amazing. It's hard not to eat the whole pint at once.
you can't go wrong with salted caramel, honestly. So if you were to have like a second choice, what would be your second choice? Because like I literally provided like two or three. I need to know people's top three.
I really don't know if I can give you an honest top three, but like off the top of my head, I really love there's a s'more ice cream that I really love. I love s'more. Um, there's so many. I really like Ben and Jerry's Netflix and Chill. It's like it's got like peanut butter and pretzel, and it's just that sweet and salty mix. I think I really love that.
My goodness.
Peanut butter chocolate, anything like that combination.
Does Ben and Jerry's have a lot of non-dairy options?
Yes, they do. A lot.
No. I have a dairy intolerance and often live my life too far on the edge. So I've been trying to find some non-dairy options. So I'll have to check them out.
Yes,
So
I can hit me up if you want some suggestions
send
because
me all the recommendations and suggestions. But you know me, I can go off on a tangent about food. So that's enough about sweet food. Let's move on to talk about some sweet poetry. You have a poem to perform for us today. Feel free to share it with us.
all right, and this poem is the title poem of my next full-length collection, which I'm going to talk more about, but this is called If the World Were a Quilt. If the world were a quilt, it would be decorated in an array of colors. The reds of lava and oranges of fire's blaze, yellows of tropical birds, the green grasses, blue whales, violets, shades of all people found there, shades of the seas, the shades in the patches of forests and jungles and swamps, mountains and sandy desert terrains, the patterns of cheetahs and orcas, fox and rattlesnakes, the brightness of a summer dandelion, darkness of the deepest cave, its contrasts of beauty abound. If the world were a quilt, and we could see all of its colors laid out and patched together with the love of Mother Nature's gentle stitching, with the loving act of creation, would we learn to respect it? Would we wrap it around ourselves and allow ourselves to become one with its warmth, with its softness? If the world were a quilt, would we protect it? Or would we destroy it, ripping the seams and pulling it apart thread by thread, throwing its tattered remains to the curbside of the Milky Way, ignoring all of its colors, all of its beauty, all of its joy? If the world were a quilt, would it remedy our loneliness? Would we find a way to call this place home?
Ooh, oh, I got goosebumps. I got goosebumps. That poem is absolutely stunning. And P.S. everyone, I have read the collection. The collection isn't in its entirety is stunning as well. But the way you use those sensory details to hone in on these subtle aspects of the nature around us that we don't often acknowledge or see, like that's really powerful because when you think about it, we're all part of like this rich tapestry, right? But we're always more eager to fray that tapestry than actually celebrate it and revel in its beauty, right? So, wow, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that piece. So, with that thought being in mind, like obviously there is an entire project connected to this poem. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, what was your vision for it? How did it take shape? And thinking about this title poem, like, how do you feel it encapsulates all of the themes within this collection?
So, oftentimes in my work, there are two threads. Sometimes they weave together really well, sometimes not as much. Um, but I really see a lot of like really gay poems or really nature related poems, and everywhere in between. And my first full length collection, Read My Lips, was taking a lot of the really more gay relationship type poems and putting them together. Some of them that had been in previous chapbooks and some new ones, and um, expanding into that full length. Very similarly, um, my second full length, which is coming out in October from Kelsey Books, and is called If the World Were a Quilt, is me taking nature poems and expanding that into full collection. Kelsey Books also published my second chapbook, Splinters, which is right behind me.
Mm.
And some of the favorites or really good ones in here are also in If the World Were a Quilt, so they have a second life in there. Um, and I mean, this opening poem is meant to kind of be it's a prologue piece. It's meant to be kind of a precursor of what's to come. There's a lot of zoning in on these different types of environments or animals or landscapes, but also these questions of like, where do we belong in this world? Kind of like you were saying, like oftentimes we as humans kind of have this wall, like we're not nature, we're not animals, we're not prone to these animalistic desires and needs and survival mechanisms within ourselves, but we totally are. Um, and how do we fit into that? So I think some of these poems kind of deal with that question. I think that's kind of a question of the whole series, the whole collection is, where do I belong? And there are hints of like in society, social, culturally, especially as queer folk in a society that isn't always very welcoming, or different parts of the country aren't as welcoming with that. So where do I belong? I don't belong with people sometimes, but I also don't feel like I belong in this natural world. Do I belong in this natural world? And there's a lot of like metaphors and connecting and reflecting of we are very animal like, we do belong in this world, or maybe we are really far removed from how we've been conditioned and how we've pulled ourselves away as humans. So I don't think there's necessarily answers. It just kind of poses some of those thoughts and questions and ideas. And I'm really excited for folks to see it.
Really excited for the world to see it as well because it like I think the message, multiple messages in it are very important for the world in general. And I like that you mentioned that really there's no answers, it's just posing questions, right? And I think the whole point behind the journey that we're on. Like we're always searching as humans, right? So if anything, I personally feel that this poem and the whole collection itself is just very much a deep examination of the human experience in general. So, which as a fellow nature poet and LGBTQ plus poet, I strongly gravitate toward and appreciate very much.
And I think
So,
there's been a little tension in me, like how do those two threads intertwine? And I think I shared it with you. I think I have it conveniently. I noticed it the other day was really easily accessible on my shelf, which isn't always the case. Um,
I need to step up my bookshelf game because your bookshelves are amazing.
I think that's showing pretty well. There's a collection called Queer Nature, and it like is all queer poets, and it's honestly one of the best anthologies I've ever read, and maybe it's just because I can connect to it. But I think so many of us as queer folk are like conditioned to think we don't belong or we're unnatural. Like that's been a lot of the political jargon we've been thrown in our face. That's unnatural or whatever, even though there's so much contradictory evidence of that in nature and biology. But this collection kind of shows that like it's part of the natural tapestry, like we belong. um so yeah, I think it's interesting to see these threads weave together in a way that hasn't always been highlighted in the world of literature or in society.
Absolutely, especially when intertwined with the LGBTQ plus experience too. Yeah, so now our final question for today. Now, there are a lot of salty powers at be in our world, and we have to know like what helps keep you sweet throughout all of this.
That is really a tough question. I don't know who came up with it.
Oh, I don't know.
um so I mean, short answer, just trying to find moments of joy and rest. But I think tough answer is doing the hard work to try and be a better person, to resolve my own shit, my own trauma. And that's really tough work and it's really challenging at times. And I think one thing that's really resonating with me that I think would make the world a better place, I don't know if it's really like sweetness, but it's kind of cutting through the social niceness that so many of us have and keeping everyone at a distance and just being open and vulnerable and honest, especially when it comes to emotions. I think there's so much shame built into even responding like how are you doing today? So many of us were automatically fine or okay. Like no one ever answers that honestly. And if we did and we were having a bad day, people would be like, whoa, too much, calm down. Like
Right.
that social politeness. And like what would happen if we just dropped that and we were just
Mm.
open with one another? Because if you and I are in the same profession, same job, working the same thing, and I'm having a rough day, but no one else ever says they're having a rough day, I'm just beating myself up and saying, oh my God, I'm not strong enough. I'm weak. I can't do this. Like all that shame spirals up. And I think so many of us are caught in those shame spirals when we are all sustainable to those bad days and negative feelings, but we don't share that. So we're all kind of suffering alone. So what would happen if we were just open with one another and more honest in personal relation? Like I see couples who aren't very open in their
Mhm.
emotional journeys. And I mean, some days are hard. Some days it's hard to communicate emotion. And I know I'm a slow processor. Sometimes like
Same.
my husband will be like, I know something's bothering you. What's going on? It's like, I don't know. I just need time. I'll come back to you. And it might be a day or
Let me
so
find the
later.
words.
And sometimes, yeah, as sometimes like the writer, I need to sit down and write it out. Like sometimes like I just need to write it out and like here's a text or an email that says what I'm feeling versus verbalizing it. And I think any form of communication is great, whether it's written, oral, whatever. But yeah. How do we get to
Wow.
a place where we're more vulnerable and open with one another? Because that frees us. And I think that came from um, a podcast that I've been listening to that's kind of helping me along my mental health journey is called Unlocking Us by Brene Brown. She's a social scientist, social worker, social scientist, does a lot of research with emotions and vulnerability and different things. And she told a story that really resonated with me. And it was I think a lot of people as caretakers, as educators can relate to this. She was in mom mode and she came back from traveling for work and she's a naturally an introvert, so that takes a lot out of her and she needs like her time. and she got home from the airport. Her son had some sort of soccer game or some sporting event. She felt like she had to go right away because she had to be mom, and that's what moms do, is support the kids and be there for everything. But she was just so exhausted, and she decided not to go. And she had that conversation with her son later. She's just like, I was overwhelmed. I just needed some me time. And he didn't really seem like it was a big deal. But then it was around the holidays, and a few weeks later, she asked for his Christmas list or whatever. And at the top of his list was me time, alone time. So by her modeling, like, I'm a human, I need my time, he had permission to do that as well. So I think of like, what would that be like on a macro scale, like in a work environment, like if we were able to get to a place, which I know is like so idealistic, but how do we move that way?
I feel like the pandemic has definitely taught us to reevaluate a lot. Whether or not as a society we start doing that, like you were just mentioning, it's a whole other story. But I think that's so important, being able to give each other permission to process, to find ourselves building up to where we can be present in different situations, right? That really resonated with me. I may have to check out this podcast because my interest is peaked now. So before we conclude this today, can you tell us where we can find your work, please?
So you can follow me on social media at CKC Poetry. I'm on, you can find me with that handle on YouTube, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I'm also on TikTok. I'm not that great about TikTok, but I'm on there.
TikTok takes getting used to.
Yeah.
I get that.
And then my website, ckcpoetry.com, you'll be able to find information on how to order this book as that comes available on there as well. So yeah, follow me and stay tuned.
I'm excited. I'm excited. So thank you for being here today, Charles. It's been great to have this conversation, and it's been such a sweet treat to have you here. So thank you for tuning in to Sunday Sweet Chats. This is the final episode of season 2. If you think there should be a third season, make sure to give the show some love by liking, commenting, clicking subscribe, and sharing it far and wide. Did I rhyme that deliberately? I don't know. We'll see. As always, stay sweet, friends, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.